Hi everyone, this is your host, Golden Buckets, and in this video I will discuss another interesting basketball comparison. This time is not about forwards like I did in the last video when I compared Kawhi Leonard and Kevin Durant, and after quite a long explanation I arrived at the conclusion that I think Kawhi was the better basketball player. In this video I will compare instead two power forwards, two very different power forwards, with a game that doesn't mirror each other at all, but are two of the greatest players in NBA history, arguably both top 20 players ever. Kevin Garnett and Dirk Nowitzki. Both incredible influential players, not only in changing the way bigger players, 6'10 and above, approach the game of basketball. Dirk Nowitzki essentially being a 7-foot shooting guard almost. He was like the precursor of Kevin Durant in some ways. Obviously, Durant is more the perimeter version of Dirk, and Dirk still had some big man elements such as a post game, and he was also a little bit bigger, being 7 foot and playing more in the post than just in the perimeter. And Kevin Garnett being a 7 foot, essentially a 7-foot forward, even though he played as a big man, he's viewed as a big man, both playing power forward and at times anchoring the defense as a center. So these are two very different players, as you all know, and but the reason why I wanted to make this video, more than in order to trace their career arc and how it differed, it is because it's to make a point that clear that, in my opinion, the basketball community, particularly in social media, doesn't grasp when it comes to basketball and the impact a player has on the team. So it seems to me, observing how people discuss these two players, how people perceive the GOAT power forward conversation, that the majority of the people seem to hold KG in a higher regard than Dirk Nowitzki, declaring him the better basketball player. And this isn't really a matter about where both of these players are ranked all time, but mostly who most people view and deem as the best player, which according to most people is KG. And I found this debate very fascinating because in all of my years covering and discussing the game of basketball, I always held the philosophy that there's a difference between who excels more in a one-on-one scenario and who is the most impactful team player out of the two. Now, and just to make a long story short, I lean towards Dirk over KG, and I want to explain the reasons why. Between the two, it is clear that KG is a much more statistically impressive basketball player between the two. At first glance, when you simply focus on statistics and the notion of two-way impact, it is quite easy to make the case that KG was a better basketball player between the two. Because examining these two players at the surface level, it becomes contrast, the lack of versatility or the lack of proficiency Dirk has in several categories, particularly as a big man compared to KG, who is one of the most, if not the most versatile player ever, okay? When you examine their statistics side by side, you think about Dirk edging KG by scoring, but not by much, KG being a good scorer when needed, but KG being a much better rebounder, leading the NBA in rebounding several years, which is quite important for a big man, KG being a little bit better as a passer, and being able to hold point forward responsibilities, particularly early on when he was in Minnesota. You also look at a major gap between them as defensive players. Dirk being viewed as a non-great defender, sometimes as an okay defender at best, if not a liability as a defensive anchor, while KG always being hailed as one of the 5 or 10 greatest defensive players ever, winning a defensive player of the year as a Boston Celtic, and transforming the entire defensive identity of the Boston Celtics, which helped them reach heights not seen since the Larry Bird era, and going to 3 finals and winning 1. Sorry, going to two NBA finals and winning 1 in 2008. So at a first glance, it's quite easy to make the case that Kevin Garnett is the better basketball player. In fact, KG should be the better basketball player. As I stated before, the defensive gap is enormous. He's a better rebounder. He's a little bit better as a passer. And Dirk Nowitzki's greatest strength scoring doesn't seem so much better than KG, at least in the regular season, to justify having Dirk over KG higher as a best player. Now, at first glance, as I stated before, KG seems to be the better basketball player. But is it really so or not? And after pondering about this issue over the years, and how KG is discussed, how his strengths are discussed in comparison to other NBA players, I came to the conclusion that, KG, as great as he was, is not as great as good as a basketball player people make him out to be. Now, I want to clarify that I do consider KG one of the 5 greatest Swiss Army knives in NBA history, arguably the first one. People that are in his mold, in my opinion, are Scottie Pippen, Draymond Green, but KG obviously did it at a much higher level, being the MVP of the league, winning the POY, something Scottie never did, even though you could argue he deserved one. So the identity and the strength of KG as a basketball player is that he's a Swiss Army knife. He's a jack of all trades. So if you're a very weak team, you would want KG over Dirk any day, because KG can cover so much deficiency in a basketball team that if you have a weak roster, having KG is like having different basketball players that perform different roles. The only thing you have it in one basketball player that can do a bit of everything, whether grab rebounds, whether guard the players in the perimeter, whether at times switching onto big men and protect a little bit the paint, whether it is playmaking for his other teammates, whether scoring 20 points and sharing a little bit of the offensive load for his team. So Kevin Garnett is a masterful jack of all trades, and his impact is particularly great if surrounded by a roster that has several limitations, because he can perform a wide variety of roles and therefore raise the floor of that given team. Dirk Nowitzki, on the other hand, is not a jack of all trades like KG. But, and here's the point about my basketball philosophy, I value more, this depends case to case obviously, because a jack of all trades type of player could be more valuable than a specialist, but my general philosophy in basketball is that I believe that a master of a few trades is more impactful and better overall in a playoff scenario than a jack of all trades type of player. Now, it is true there are situations where the jack of all trades type of player is more valuable, and I'm not disputing that, but I believe that when it comes to the playoffs, being able to do a little bit of everything is less valuable than being amazing and exceptional at one given thing, or even at two different things, such as is the case for players like Timmy. And now this is not a Tim Duncan KG comparison, but just to make this brief point, I do believe that we could categorize Timmy as a master of trades. Now, he's not a jack of all trades that can do everything. He cannot perform certain things as good or even on the same stratosphere as KG, particularly when it comes to switchability onto perimeter guards. This is true. Or KG is probably a better long mid-range shooter than Timmy, a little bit better as a passer, and so forth. However, the ability that Timmy has at being masterful at two critical things in the game of basketball, which is rim protection, defending the paint at a higher level than almost anyone in the league, and being able to get you a bucket and score 30 points much more easily in a playoff settings than KG, in my opinion, makes him a much more valuable basketball player to win playoff games, playoff series, and ultimately to win the championship. Now, this video is not about the Tim Duncan KG comparison. So I want to now discuss for a second Dirk Nowitzki. So, as I stated before, if you look at those two players on a surface level, that is, simply watching highlights, simply looking at their statistics, it is clear that, particularly in the regular season, KG seems to have a much greater statistical all-around game and production. However, there were many times when he was in Minnesota that KG, for as weak the roster was around him, and management definitely sucked in the period. They squandered a little bit of the prime of KG in Minnesota. I'm not denying that. I'm not disputing this notion. However, for as weak the roster around him was, KG wasn't able to get them over the hump. What do I mean? I'm not talking about unrealistic expectations such as winning the title. No one will ever hold a player like KG or LeBron in Cleveland or a superstar surrounded by weak talent guilty for not winning the championship. But the way I see it is that KG in Minnesota couldn't not only miss the playoffs in his prime at least 3 times, but if you look at the standings every year, for as great as KG was, the Timberwolves were in the bottom 5 almost every year. Almost every year. So either missing the playoffs or being bounced in the first round almost every year. If I'm not mistaken, in 12 plus years that KG spent in Minnesota, I think he won 2 playoff series in a 12-year span. And as I stated before, there's a difference between blaming someone for not winning the championship, which is something I'm not. I'm simply looking at the situation on how bad the Timberwolves were, even with KG. And I'm of the mindset that if you're a truly transcendent player, such as a number 1 option, you should lead your team to a kind of success. Now, I'm not talking about winning the title, but at least being in contention much more than what KG was able to do with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And when you look at Dirk Nowitzki, on the other hand, yes, it is true his rosters were a little bit better than what KG was afforded in Minnesota. However, Dirk Nowitzki never played really with all-star caliber players when he was in Dallas, particularly in his prime. And yet, Dirk Nowitzki was able to lead the Mavs to a 50-win season almost every year in his prime. I think Dirk had 7 or more 50-win seasons in the same time where KG, for how much he was praised by hoopers and basketball enthusiasts, he wasn't even able to sniff the type of success that Dirk enjoyed in Dallas. So, in my view, if we go beyond stats and we simply look at impact, it's undeniable that, first of all, in the regular season, having Dirk on your team, basically because of this difference between the jack of all trades type of prototype and the master of trades prototype, Dirk Nowitzki gift, let's say, which is scoring, the ability to average 30 quite easily, and particularly to elevate in high leverage moments such as in the playoffs. In my opinion, that skill is much more valuable and irreplaceable than Dirk's ability to KG's ability to perform multiple tasks. And here I explain why. Because if you're building a roster, okay, and you have a player like KG, okay, obviously you know that a basketball team is made up of 5 players, okay? So if you have 5 players on the court, you know that multiple players have to perform several duties, whether it is shooting, scoring, rebounding, defending, and so forth. So being extra good in categories that your other 4 teammates have to cover in a way or another is less valuable than the ability of a player like Dirk Nowitzki to be clutch when it matters, to be able to get a bucket at any moment in the playoffs due to his mastery as a scorer, both in the mid-range, as a three-point shooter. Early on in his career, Dirk was even very good at getting to the line. I think he was getting to the line 8 or 9 times a game in the playoffs. So the ability to be a scorer, in my opinion, elevates your team much more than the ability to be a floor raiser. Than the ability of being a jack of all trades type of player. And now, as I stated before, the only scenario where I will pick KG over Dirk if I'm starting a team is there are 2 scenarios. One, I have a very weak roster, like Minnesota had it, and my goal is not to win the championships, but to turn a 10 or a 5 win team into a 30 win team. In that scenario, I will probably pick KG, okay? The other scenarios, if I have a team like the Boston Celtics, where I have already a few stars or high-level stars, like KG had in Rondo, who was a top 5 point guard at the time, Ray Allen, a top 2 or 3 shooting guard, Paul Pierce, a top 2-3 small forward. In that scenario, I understand the reasoning for choosing KG. But if you're starting a team from scratch, I do believe that Dirk Nowitzki gives you a higher chance of winning the title. Dirk Nowitzki, like many other players of his era, he played in an extremely tough Western Conference. And yet, the Mavericks were almost at the top of the seedings almost every year. And when you think about 2006, I think that is one of the most underrated seasons we've ever seen by power forward. I think Dirk Nowitzki finished top 3 in the MVP. I think he could have won over Nash, in my opinion, because he led the Mavs to a 60-win record. But in the playoffs, Dirk Nowitzki played at a level that I'm not sure I've ever seen KG do in the playoffs. I've seen him go toe-to-toe with the defending champions Spurs, and even outplaying in some instances Tim Duncan, who was still in his prime. And Dirk's run to the playoffs in 2006 is one of the most underrated, under-discussed, and under-celebrated runs to a finals that I've seen. And Dirk Nowitzki was masterful. He had 50-point games. He played like an absolute superstar. And this is the other point I want to make. Not only I believe the master of a few trades, a prototype, to be more valuable than a jack of all trades type of player, but also Dirk Nowitzki had some of the greatest intangibles I've ever seen by basketball players. What do I mean by that? I'm not saying that KG didn't have them. KG was intense as everyone. He was always relentless. He always gave his best. But what do I mean by that? Dirk Nowitzki had the winning factor that very few players had. And he's even more impressive given the team he was drafted in. Because Dallas, to be honest with you, was a garbage organization, if you are really honest, because they failed to put players around him. And back to my point about the winning intangibles, Dirk Nowitzki had that ability to elevate in the playoffs that very few players in history have. Like Jimmy Butler is one of the current examples. There are players that you will choose over Jimmy Butler, right? In the regular season. You will choose Jason Tatum, no doubt. Kevin Durant, no doubt. There are a lot of players you will pick over Jimmy Butler in the regular season because they perform better, they have better stats, they produce more. But when it comes to the playoffs, players like Jimmy have an ability to raise their game to a new level and to become very difficult to coach against, to scheme and scout against in the playoffs. And Dirk Nowitzki was very similar to Jimmy Butler in that regard. He had that ability to go to a different level in the playoffs. In fact, Dirk averaged 25 a game and 10 rebounds a game for his career in the playoffs, which is roughly on par with some of the other greats at the power forward position, such as Karl Malone and Charles Barkley. So, to me, the biggest separator between these two players is that Dirk Nowitzki had that ability to play his best basketball when it came to the playoffs, something that KG a little bit struggled with. When you look at the career of KG, I think KG never had only one 40-point game in the playoffs, and I think he had only 11 or 12 30-point games in the playoffs. Compare that to Dirk Nowitzki, for instance. Now, after listening to my video, don't take my opinion for the fact. You do your own research and you determine who was the better basketball player. And now, on the issue of two-way value, right? I personally believe that two-way value, which is the ability to impact both offense and defense, is on certain occasions overvalued by the basketball community. What does it mean? In order to win a championship, you have to put a lineup. You have to put 5 players together, and that lineup has to beat the other team, right? So that is the goal of basketball. Basketball is not played one-on-one. There are many basketball players that will be better than others if all we did was measure two-way ability. You know, a player like Paul George will be a better player than almost everyone. You know, he will be better than Luka Doncic, than Steph Curry. There are so many examples in NBA history. You know, Rudy Gobert, when he was the best defender, or arguably top 3 defender in the league a few years ago, no one ranked him in the top 7 or 8 or 9 players in the league, even though he was arguably the best defender in the league, at least in the regular season, and the player who could give you 16 a night. You know, so there we have to pay attention when we use the bare fact that a player is a much better two-way player than another in making the determination that he's a better basketball player. Now, if basketball was played one-on-one, yes, KG will be a better player than Dirk Nowitzki, and he will beat him in a one-on-one. But if you're building a team that wants to win the title, right? You have your superstar, let's say KG or Dirk, and you surround him with 4 players. In my opinion, Dirk Nowitzki gives you the higher chance of building a team that can win the title. And as I said before, yes, Dirk isn't a great defender, okay? And you have to put a defensive pieces around him, such as the Mavs did in 2011 when they had Tyson Chandler as a center and other pieces to win. However, what is more difficult to find in your opinion? Few role players that can perform good defense, or a superstar that can go 30 games a night in the playoffs? This is a very good question for fans to answer, because in my opinion, if you have a player like Dirk, particularly in his prime, you don't need players that are good at getting a bucket. You just need a few role players who can perform good defense, and obviously maybe a player who can get you 18 a game. But the thing with KG is that KG, you need much more to fill your roster if you have KG compared to Dirk. Because yes, it is true that KG is a better defensive player. However, if you have KG, you also need a superstar or borderline superstar offensive player, which is much harder to come by in the NBA market. You know, people forget about it, but Paul Pierce in the 2000, you know, in that decade, he was viewed as, after McGrady suffered injuries, he was argued as a top 3 small forward in the game. Now, he wasn't close to the level of LeBron and the Kobe's of the world. However, he was one of the few players that in a playoff series could go toe-to-toe with them and average 13 in a game. Very few players could do that at the time, you know, and we should not overlook this when comparing, you know, KG to Dirk, because if you have KG as a centerpiece of your team, you also need great offensive players to complement his skills in order to win a championship. Rajon Rondo, one of the best passers in the league. Ray Allen, who wasn't in his prime but was still a very good shooter and scorer, although not at the superstar level. And Paul Pierce, who could shoulder the offense like very few perimeter players in the league could. So if you have Dirk Nowitzki on the other hand, who is the player who can get you 30 a night? Who is the player who can hit the clutch shots and take over a game when it matters? In my opinion, you have less to worry about when constructing a roster. You simply need to put good defensive players around him, such as a Tyson Chandler, and you are much more likely to elevate the team to a championship level. So, and even the all-around game gap, you know, in the playoffs, it becomes less apparent because Dirk Nowitzki was a much better rebounder in the playoffs than he was in the regular season. So he averaged 25 and 10 in his prime, probably around 27 and 11 and a half. So Dirk Nowitzki provided good rebounding for a big man. Probably not as good as Duncan or KG, but he was a good rebounder in the playoffs. And as I said before, KG being a master of scoring, that alone impacted way more his team than KG's all-around game did. And there's a reason why players like Scottie Pippen, a player that I believe is in some ways underrated, isn't ranked as high all time. Because a player like Scottie Pippen in his prime could get you 20 points a game, could get you 9, 10 rebounds a game, 8 or 9 assists. He could defend the best players, he could average 3 steals in a game. But there's a reason why a player like Scottie is not rated as high as many other forwards in the game history or other players in NBA history. And the reason why is because being a jack of all trades, someone who can do a little bit of everything, but cannot take over a game, average 30 points a game when you need to, is less valuable than a player like a player like a Dirk Nowitzki or a James Harden that can carry a team by themselves. And here's definitely why I believe Dirk Nowitzki is better than KG. Now, for all of you who think that I'm not a KG fan, I believe that KG's game is in my opinion, more beautiful overall, because I love to see when I'm watching a game strictly for highlights and enjoyment, I would like to watch KG more, because I believe he had an edge to him. His one-on-one game was really way ahead of his time. But again, the reason why I believe KG's ability gets slightly overrated is because people overvalue versatility over the ability to dominate in one of the main skills at a high level. Now, KG, I'm not saying he wasn't great at everything, right? He did many things good. Well, he was a very good passer. He was an excellent rebounder. He was a good scorer. He was a very good perimeter defender, a very good rim protector, but he wasn't exceptional in none of these things, you know? And in the playoff settings, a player like Duncan, who can impose his will by rim protecting, a superstar like Dirk that can impact scoring at a high level, in my opinion, contribute more to winning under those circumstances. So, based on my overall assessment, I would draft KG. I would draft Dirk over KG any day of the week if I'm building a championship team. But in terms of watchability and who I like to watch for highlights, then it's KG. I hope I answered all of your questions. And if you have any comments, do you agree with me or do you disagree? Let me know what you think in the comments. Share, like, and subscribe. Thank you, guys. Bye.